Hello everyone. Today I want to cover one of the most controversial issues in the road to the Civil War, and this is John Brown's attack on Harpers Ferry, right? I always like covering this topic because I believe this is one of the topics that you can learn about the most, right? Particularly the issues of do the ends justify the means, and when or if is violence acceptable as a recourse, right? So I'm always kind of very surprised that a lot of my students don't know who's John Brown. I don't know if they're not paying attention in high school or they're not teaching them, but this is definitely one of the most important topics in the road to the Civil War. So let's get started. All right, so who's John Brown? John Brown is one of the most radical abolitionists in the 1850s, right? And I'm using the word radical in the context of the 1800s, all right? Because John Brown believes in immediate abolition of slavery, but not just that, also equality before the law for slaves, right? So in the 1850s, this is a very radical idea, right? The anti-slavery movement, which is what most of the northern states are, they believe in either gradual emancipation or immediate emancipation, but also they're not completely sold on the idea of equality before the law, right? So John Brown is a guy who's all in the idea of the abolition of slavery, right? So what makes John Brown controversial, right? So John Brown is controversial because of his actions in 1859 at Harpers Ferry, Virginia, right? So to understand this, we need to go back a little bit, like 10 years, nine years to the Compromise of 1850, right? So in the early 1850s, slavery became the focus and most important point in American politics, right? So why is this, right? The Compromise of 1850 with the Fugitive Slave Law, also the Kansas-Nebraska Act leading to Bleeding Kansas, which John Brown participates on it, killing 5 slave owners with broadswords. And then we also going to have the Dred Scott decision. All these issues that you're going to see are basically positioning the government kind of like favoring slavery, right? So John Brown is growing very frustrated that the abolitionist movement or the anti-slavery movement is not advancing in the way that he wanted, right? So he believes that he is, a kind of sort of prophet of God, right? He believes he's been ordained by God, to destroy slavery on earth, right? And John Brown, believing that he's an emissary of God, will take matters into his own hands, right? What is he going to do? John Brown will steal the gun from the federal armory on Harpers Ferry, Virginia, and he's gonna start a insurrection, right? His plan is to start in Virginia and start arming all the slaves and begin a slave insurrection, right? As you may imagine, this is not gonna work, and it's basically going to be a disaster, right? The militaries come into Virginia. John Brown is captured very early on. I think his sons are either captured or murdered, and then he's gonna be captured, right? So this is not necessarily the most controversial issue. What makes John Brown controversial is the outcome of all of it, right? What do I mean by this, right? His trial is going to capture the minds of all Americans in 1859. The year is important, right? Why is it important? Because in 1860 we have the presidential election, right? In which Lincoln is going to be the next president, and if the past events hadn't made slavery the focus point of the election, now John Brown's action will certainly make it, all right? What do I mean by this, right? John Brown's actions is going to divide the nation very clearly into, is violence accepted to end slavery, or should these people be considered, terrorists, right? And it's very clearly that in the South, they see John Brown as a terrorist, right? He's gonna get hanged, right? And in the North, they begin seeing John Brown as a martyr, right? They see him as someone who's willing to die for the cause, right? They see John Brown as a hero, right? So it's very strange, right? Because you see the same event, but you see the North and the South judging it with completely different eyes. And it's not just different, they're opposing. It's villain, it's hero, right? So the lessons to be learned about this John Brown action, guys, is basically the idea of, should John Brown be remembered as a hero or as a villain? At the time in the 1850s, this became very, very controversial because, again, 1 year later, you're going to have the presidential election, and the animosity between North and South couldn't be at a higher level, right? So a lot of the controversy surrounding John Brown is, do the ends justify the means, right? Because John Brown is a little bit psychotic in the idea of, he believes he talks to God, and he believes God puts him on earth to fulfill this mission, right? So in order for him to fulfill this mission, he's willing to do anything, right? And that includes, killing people, right? So the idea of, do the ends justify the means, is very clearly highlighted by John Brown, who's willing to incite insurrection, kill people, and do whatever it takes to end the institution of slavery. Now, in hindsight, in our present time, most people want to think of John Brown as a hero, right? Because he's willing to die in order to abolish slavery, right? But in the 1850s, when this happened, this was not the case, right? It basically split up the nation to a point that is basically, unrecognizable at the time, right? So the other thing that makes John Brown controversial is, when is violence accepted, right? Because you're gonna see the argument of, it's never accepted, or sometimes it's accepted, right? And it leads to some of these very interesting conversations about when and how, and it also leaves interesting precedents, right? That if you accept the idea that sometimes it's okay, it opens up the doors to, like, well, what are the other times, or what specific times it's okay to go all in and kill people and do anything it takes in order for you to accomplish your goal, right? So it serves very interesting topics for conversation, guys. And is John Brown a hero or a villain? Although, quite honestly, I don't like to ask the whole hero or villain, because I don't think people should be interpreted in that way, right? You don't have to be a hero or a villain. There's the in between, which I think is somewhere where John Brown falls into, right? But let me know what you think about John Brown. What should be the legacy of John Brown today, right? So let me leave you with John Brown's last words, so bear with me. It's as if he knew a civil war was coming, right? So he's basically saying, the sins of this nation because of slavery are only going to be able to be purged through blood, right? And 1 year later, the Civil War happens, right? Leading to up to 700,000 casualties, right? So very interesting topic. Let me know what y'all think. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll be around, okay? Be safe.